The Exodus. Vralla was a little girl, beautiful and sweet-natured, beautiful and smart, beautiful and energetic. Everything that her parents had dreamed she would be. As perfect as she was, they could not help but have dreams for her. Her father, a bit of a social climber named Munthen, thought she would marry well, perhaps become a princess of the empire. Her mother, an insecure woman named Sinetta, thought she would reach greatness on her own as a knight or a sorceress. As much as they wanted the very best for their daughter, they argued about what her fate would be, but both were wrong. Instead of growing up, she grew very ill. The temples told them to give up hope, and the Mages Guild told them that what afflicted Vralla was so rare, so deadly, that there was no cure. She was doomed to die, and soon. When the great institutions of the empire failed them, Munthen and Sinetta sought out the witches, the sorcerer hermits, and the other hidden secret powers that lurk in the shadows of civilization. "I can think of only one place you can go," said an old herbalist they found in the most remote peaks of the Hrothgardian mountains, the Mages Guild at Olenveld. "But we have already been to the Mages Guild," protested Munthen. "They couldn't help us." "Go to Olenveld," the herbalist insisted, "and tell no one that you're going there." It was not easy to find Olenveld, as it did not appear on any modern map. In a bookseller's in Skyrim, however, they found it in a historic book of cartography from the Second Era. In the yellowed pages, there was Olenveld, a city on an island in the northern coast, a day's sail in summertide from Winterhold. Bundling their pale daughter against the chill of the ocean wind, the couple set sail, using the old map as their only guide. For nearly 2 days they were at sea, circling the same position, wondering if they were the victim of a cruel trick. And then they saw it. In the midst of crashing waves were twin crumbled statues framing the harbor, long-forgotten gods or heroes. The ships within were half sunk, rotten shelves along the docks. Munthen brought his ship in, and the three walked into the deserted island city. Taverns with broken windows, a plaza with a dried-up well, shattered palaces and fire-blackened tenements, barren shops and abandoned stables, all desolate, all still, but for the high-keening ocean wind that whistled through the empty places. And gravestones. Every road and alley was lined and crossed again with memorials to the dead. Munthen and Sinetta looked at one another. The chill they felt had little to do with the wind. Then they looked at Vralla and continued on to their goal, the Mages Guild of Olenveld. Candlelight glistened through the windows of the great dark building, but it brought them little relief to know that someone was alive in this island of death. They knocked on the door and steeled themselves against whatever horror they might face within. The door was opened by a rather plump middle-aged Nord woman with frizzy blonde hair. Standing behind her, a meek-looking bald Nord about her age, a shy teenage Breton couple, still very pimply and awkward, and a very old, apple-cheeked Breton man who grinned with delight at the visitors. "Oh my goodness," said the Nord woman, all afluster. "I thought my ears must be fooling me when I heard that door a-knockin'. Come in, it is so cold." The three were ushered in the door, and they were relieved to find that the guild did not look abandoned in the least. It was well swept, well lit, and cheerfully decorated. The group fell into introductions. The inhabitants of the guild house in Olenveld were two families, the Nords Hjalmar and Nette, and the Bretons Lywel, Rosalind, and Old Winster. They were friendly and accommodating, immediately bringing some mulled wine and bread, while Munthen and Sinetta explained to them what they were doing there and what the healers and herbalists said about Vralla. "So, you see," said Sinetta tearfully, "we didn't think we'd find the Mages Guild in Olenveld, but now that we have, please, you are our last hope." The 5 strangers also had tears in their eyes. Nette wept particularly noisily. "Oh, you have been through too much," the Nord woman bawled. "Of course we'll help. Your little girl will be right as rain." "It is fair to tell you," said Hjalmar more stoically, though he clearly was also touched by the tale. "This is a guild house, but we are not mages. We took this building because it was abandoned, and it serves our purposes since the Exodus. We are necromancers." "Necromancers?" Sinetta quivered. How could these nice people be anything so horrible? "Yes, dear," Netta smiled, patting her hand. "I know. We have a bad reputation, I'm afraid. Never was very good, and now that well-meaning but foolish Archmagister Hannibal Traven, may the Worm King eat his soul," cried the old man quite suddenly and very viciously. Now, Winster," said the teenage girl, Rosalind, blushing and smiling at Sinetta apologetically. "I'm sorry about him. He's usually very sweet-natured." "Well, of course, he's right. Manny Marco will have the last say in the matter," Hjalmar said. "But right now it's all very, well, awkward. When Traven officially banned the art, we had to go into hiding. The only other option was to abandon it altogether, and that's just foolish, though there are many who have done it. Not many people know about Olenveld anymore, since Tiber Septim used it as his own personal graveyard," said Lywel. "Took us a week to find it again, but it's perfect for us. Lots of dead bodies, you know." "Lywel!" Rosalind admonished him. "You're going to scare them." "I don't care what you do here," said Munthen sternly. "I just want to know what you can do for my daughter." "Well," said Hjalmar with a shrug, "I guess we can make it so she doesn't die and is never sick again." Sinetta gasped. "Please, we'll give you everything we have." "Nonsense," said Nette, picking up Vralla in her big beefy arms. "Oh, what a beautiful girl. Would you like to feel better, little sweetheart?" Vralla nodded wearily. "You stay here," Hjalmar said. "Rosalind, I'm sure we have something better than bread to offer these nice folks." Nette started to carry Vralla away, but Sinetta ran after her. "Wait, I'm coming too." "Oh, I'm sure you would, but it would ruin the spell, dear," Nette said. "Don't worry about a thing. We have done this dozens of times." Munthen puts his arms around his wife, and she relented. Rosalind hurried off to the kitchen and brought some roast fowl and more mulled wine for them. They sat in silence and ate. Winster shuddered suddenly. "The little girl has died." "Oh!" Sinetta gasped. "What in oblivion do you mean?" Munthen cried. "Winster, was that really necessary?" Lywel scowled at the old man before turning to Munthen and Sinetta. "She had to die. Necromancy is not about curing a disease, it is about resurrection, total regeneration, transforming the whole body, not just the parts that aren't working now. Munthan stood up angrily. If those maniacs killed her, they didn't. Rosalind snapped, her shy eyes now showing fire. Your daughter was on her last breath when she came in here. Anyone could see that. I know that this is hard, horrible even, but I won't have you call that sweet couple who are only trying to help you maniacs. Sinetta burst into tears. But she's going to live now, isn't she? Oh yes, Lyle said, smiling broadly. Oh, thank you, thank you. Sinetta burst into tears. I don't know what we would have done. I know how you feel, said Rosalind, patting Winster's hand fondly. When I thought we were going to lose him, I was willing to do anything, just like you. Sinetta smiled. How old is your father? My son, Rosalind corrected her. He's 6. From the other room came the sound of tiny footsteps. Vrala, go give your parents a big hug, said Hjalmar. Munthan and Sinetta turned, and the screaming began. Purloined Shadows, Chapter 1. The candle was lit, and the thief was standing there, blinking, caught. She was young, rather dirty, wearing ragged black clothes that were surely quite smart and expensive weeks ago when she had stolen them from one of the city's best tailors. The look of surprise leaped from her face, and she took on a blank expression as she put the gold back on the table. What are you doing here? The man with the candle asked, stepping from the shadows. That's a stupid question, the girl replied, frowning. I'm obviously robbing you. Since nothing I have is missing, the man smiled, glancing at the gold on the table. I would have to say that you're not robbing me. Attempting to rob me, perhaps. The question I have is, why? You know who I am, I assume. You didn't just come in through an unlocked door. I have stolen from everyone else. I have taken soul gems from the Mages Guild. I've robbed the treasury of the most secure fortress. I cheated the Archbishop of Julianos. I even pickpocketed the Emperor Pelagius at his coronation. I thought it was your turn. I'm flattered, the man nodded. Now that your ambition has been thwarted, what will you do? Flee? Perhaps retire? Teach me, the girl replied, a little grin finding its way unconsciously on her face. I picked all your locks. I slipped past all your wards. You designed them. You know how difficult that was for someone without training. I didn't come here for 6 gold pieces. I came here to prove myself. Make me your student. The Master of Stealth looked at the little girl burglar. Your skill is not in need of training. Your planning is adequate, but I can help you with that. What is without hope is your ambition. You are past stealing for your livelihood. Now you steal for the pleasure of it, for the challenge. That's a personality trait which is incurable and will lead you to an early grave. Haven't you ever wanted to steal that which can't be stolen? The girl asked. Something that would make your name known forever. The master did not answer, he only frowned. Clearly, I was fooled by your reputation, she shrugged and opened a window. I thought you might want a willing accomplice on some great act of thievery which would go down in history, like you said. My skill at planning is only adequate. I didn't have in mind an escape route, but this will have to do. The burglar slipped down the sheer wall, dashed across the shadowy courtyard, and within a few minutes was back at her room in the run-down tavern. The master was waiting for her there in the dark. "I didn't see you go past me," she gasped. "You turned on the street when you heard the owl call," he replied. "The most important tool in thieves' repertoire is distraction, either planned or improvised. I suppose your lessons have begun." "And what is the final test?" the girl smiled. When he told her, she could only stare. She had, it seemed, not misunderstood his reputation for daring. Not at all. Chapter 2. For the week leading up to the 8th of Hearthfire, the skies above Rindale were dark and alive as clouds of crows blotted out the sun. Their guttural squawks and groans deafened all. The peasants wisely bolted their doors and windows, praying to survival that most unholy of days. On the night of the summoning, the birds fell silent, their black, unblinking eyes following the witch's march into the glen. There were no moons to light the way, only the leader's single torch in the gloom. Their white robes appeared as indistinct shapes, like the faintest of ghosts. A single tall tree stood in the middle of the clearing, every branch thick with crows, watching the procession without moving. The lead witch placed a torch at the base of the tree, and her 17 followers formed a circle and began their slow, strange, wailing chant. As they sang, the glow of the torch began to change. It did not diminish at all, but its color became more and more gray, so it seemed a pulsating wave of ash had fallen on the witches. Then it grew darker still, so that for a moment, though the fire yet burned, it was the darkest night in the forest. The penumbra continued until the torch was burning with a color without a name, emptiness beyond mere blackness. It cast a glow, but it was an unnatural scintillation falling on the witches. Their robes of white became black. The Dunmer among them had eyes of green and ivory white flesh. The Nords appeared black as coal. The crows watching overhead were as pure white as the witches' cloaks. The Daedra princess Nocturnal stepped out of the pit of uncolor. She stood in the center of the circle, the tree of pallid crows her throne, aloof, as the witches continued their chanting, dropping their robes to prostrate themselves naked before their great mistress. Wrapping her night cloak around her, she smiled at their song. It spoke of her mystery, of veiled beauty, of eternal shadows, and a divine future when the sun burns no more. Nocturnal let her cloak slide from her shoulders and was naked. Her witches did not raise their head from the ground, but continued their hymn of darkness. "Now," said the girl to herself. She had been up in the tree all day, dressed in a ridiculous suit of mock crows. It was uncomfortable, but when the witches had arrived, she forgot all her aches and concentrated on being perfectly still, like the other crows in the tree. It had taken considerable planning and study between her and the Master of Stealth to find the glen, and to learn what to expect in the summoning of Nocturnal. Gently, silently, the burglar eased herself down the branches of the tree, coming closer and closer to the Daedra princess. She let herself break her concentration for just a moment, and wondered where the master was. He had been confident in the plan. He said that when Nocturnal dropped her cloak, there would be a distraction, and it could be quickly taken in that instant, provided the girl was in position at the precise right moment. The girl climbed along the lowest of the branches, carefully pushing aside the crows that were, as the master said, transfixed by the princess in her naked beauty. The girl was now close enough if she only reached out her arm to touch Nocturnal's back. The song was rising to a crescendo, and the girl knew that the ceremony would soon be over. Nocturnal would clothe herself before the witches ended the chant, and the chance to take the cloak would be over. The girl gripped the tree branch tightly as her mind raced. Could it be that the master was not here at all? Was this conceivably the entire test? Was it only to show that it could be done, not to do it? The girl was furious. She had done everything perfectly, but the so-called master of stealth had proven himself a coward. Perhaps he had taught her a little in the months that it took to plan this, but what was it worth? Only one thing made her smile. On that night, when she had stolen into his stronghold, she had kept one single gold piece, and he had never suspected it. It was symbolic as stealing the cloak of Nocturnal in its way, proving that the master thief could be robbed. The girl was so lost on her mind that she thought she imagined it for a moment when a man's voice yelled out from the darkness, "Mistress!" The next words she knew she didn't imagine. "Mistress, a thief! Behind you!" The witches raised their heads and screamed, ruining the sanctity of the ceremony as they charged forward. The crows awoke and burst from the tree in an explosion of feathers and toad-like cries. Nocturnal herself whirled around, affixing the girl with her black eyes. "Who art thee who dares profane?" the princess hissed, as the pitch shadows flew from her body, enveloping the girl in their lethal chill. In the last instant, before she was swallowed alive by darkness, the girl looked to the ground and saw that the cloak was gone, and she answered, as she understood, "Oh, who am I? I'm the distraction." The Asylum Ball. My great-great-uncle was a warder at an asylum in Torval. Maybe he was my great-great-great-uncle. It was quite a long time ago. And this is the story that has been passed down in my family from his generation to mine. Perhaps it is purely apocryphal, but when I was told it, it was whispered in such a way that it was meant to be taken seriously. Not having any children of my own to whisper to, and being in need of some gold, I have elected to publish my story. The asylum my great-great-uncle worked in was apparently very posh. Only the right class of lunatics were admitted. Eccentric dukes, mad baronesses, touched lords, and daft ladies filled the asylum's tapestried and gilded halls. Still, it was a time of great excitement when the rumor began that the unhinged Emperor of Tamriel, Pelagius III, was transferring there from a resort in Valenwood. When the rumor became a reality, the asylum went into nice, calm, restive chaos. Pelagius was given an entire wing of the asylum for his own use, for though he was madder than a jackal, he was still His Terrible Majesty, the Emperor of Tamriel. The Emperor was remarkably well behaved, my great-great-uncle supposedly asserted. Of course, he did not have to face the commoners who came on all sorts of pretenses to gawk at their overlord, the loon. When one of the warders, not, I have been assured, my uncle, forgot himself and let His Terrible Majesty know that people had been there to see him, the Emperor grew very excited. He made up his mind right there and then to have a ball. A huge party with musicians, dancing and dinner right at the lunatic asylum, or precisely in his wing of the asylum. Rumors of the emperor's interest in holding a ball spread throughout Torval, and eventually it reached the ears of the empress regent Kataraya, Pelagius' dear wife, in the imperial city. Eager to make her husband happy, she sent a caravan laden with gold to the asylum so a ball might be held befitting the imperial dignity. The emperor picked a date for the ball, and preparations began immediately. The old asylum walls were beautifully decorated, but needed cleaning. A pit had to be constructed to house the orchestra. Servants for cooking and serving the food had to be hired. Gold and ebony candelabras and matching chandeliers were ordered. The old rugs were destroyed, and new rugs embroidered with gems were weaved. Lists of guests had to be compiled, reconsidered, and recompiled. The emperor knew that the guest list had to be very exclusive, and he relied on his advisors to tell him who was alive, who was dead, and who was imaginary. The party was set to begin at 9 o'clock. At 6, the hairdresser he had hired from Torval finished his imperial coiffure. At 7, he was fully dressed in the robes he had ordered for the ball, voluminous black silk and piled velvet crusted with red diamonds. At 8, he walked down the newly reconstructed staircase to supervise the final preparations, the lighting of the candles, the opening of the wine, the murder of the first course. At 9 o'clock, he took his seat at the facsimile throne he had ordered and awaited the first guests. At 9:30, his advisor, seeing the royal eyes beginning to glaze over with madness, said, "Your terrible majesty surely knows that it is not fashionable to arrive at any ball for at least an hour after the desired time, yes?" The emperor just stared. At 10:30, the emperor called for some food and wine and sat at his throne, looking at the open door, eating. 30 minutes later, he ordered the orchestra to begin playing. For the next 3 hours, they played gaily for the empty, candlelit ballroom. At 1 o'clock, the emperor announced his intention to retire for the evening. My uncle was one of the warders who assisted His Terrible Majesty up the staircase. Halfway to his room, Pelagius threw himself on the floor in a hysteria, screaming and laughing, ordering more wine. My mother was good at this part of the story, rolling her eyes and shrieking, more wine, wine, and, in short, imagining that he was possessed by all the revelers at his party that never was. 2 days later, he was still not better. He had cut himself and those who tried to grapple him horribly with the red diamonds of his robe. Eventually, it was decided that the Torval asylum was not equipped to deal with a lunatic of his severity, and he was sent to a more secure location in Black Marsh. It was only 3 months later my uncle heard that the emperor had died. One of my uncle's duties was to clear out the personal property of the inmates after their death. Being primarily landed nobility, the personal property was often quite extensive. Several years after the Asylum Ball, my uncle was called to clear out the apartment of a duchess whose chief eccentricity was a propensity to pilfer. Kleptomania, I believe it's called. Locked away in a secret door in her desk, protected by a trap armed with a barbed needle, was a variety of jewels, piles of gold, and 5 large stacks of beautifully engraved invitations signed in the Emperor's childlike handwriting.